All right. So I'm Jean Ducrot, and I want to let you know that I'm wearing a jacket to make everybody feel a lot cooler today. That's the only reason I've been wearing this all day. I'm also an accessibility specialist for Elsevier, so I don't work directly for Digital Commons, but I work with Digital Commons, and I'll explain how that fits into the picture in a minute. I'm an engineer by trade. I've worked as a software engineer most of my career, and I specialized into digital accessibility for about 10 years now. I am a disabled veteran, and it has nothing to do with my French accent. It has to do with my service in the Air Force. I spent about 7 years in the Air Force. I served as a software engineer. That's where I got my career started. I've worked for small and large companies. I've worked for a small company you might have heard of that now belongs to Elsevier called Interfolio. That's where I started working after I served in the Air Force, actually, and where I started working as an accessibility engineer after almost 10 years of working there. And eventually, I found my way at Elsevier because they opened a very unique position with a dual responsibility. So part of my time, half my time is split up between supporting one of our internal divisions, and the other half of my time is split up supporting the anything that has to do with the accessibility of the tools that any of our employees use in the exercise of their daily activities. So whether it's an internal tool or an external tool, the company has realized that it's really important that people be able to use it in a way that works for them. So that brings me to my next slide, which is, why does Elsevier care so much about accessibility? Because they've realized that whether you're contributing research to in the form of journals, or in the form of research, or you want to read up about research or any of the information that you all are gathering and aggregating as librarians, you got to be able to do it in a way that works for you. And that means a lot of different things for a lot of different people, depending on your ability, your geographical location, your mother tongue, the age that you are. It means a lot of different ways that is very hard to anticipate when you're designing a product, especially a product that is meant to live digitally for a long time. So, you know, some of the ways that, some of the reasons that Elsevier cares about accessibility is also many of the ways why you care about accessibility is, you know, for legal reasons. We'll have to comply with different laws and regulation depending on where we are. Here in the United States, we're you know, concerned with the ADA, and not the dental kind, but the but with the American with Disabilities Act. But if you're in Canada, all the provinces in Canada have different accessibility regulation. In Europe, they're rolling out next year some very stringent accessibility regulation. So a lot of different regulation that is somewhat similar, but somewhat different. So we really need to spend some time looking at that and building a team that could really focus on that and not be focusing on other things like development or design was very important. Of course, there is some other things that are important, like, you know, improved brand reputation and economic benefits. But at the core of their concern is really realizing that the more people can contribute and consume the information that is being aggregated, the better it is for everybody. Now, I want to spend just a minute to talk about what is accessibility. And you might be wondering, why is he doing that? We all know what this is. Well, here. The reason I do that, and I do that in all the presentations that I do, is because I find that most people have an incomplete picture about what accessibility is. most folks think that accessibility is making sure that digital products are accessible to people with disability, and often they don't include themselves in that group. But really, accessibility is making sure that digital content works for all of us. And what I mean by that is, yes, accessibility is doing things like adding alt text to images. And you might think, well, that only benefits people who are blind and using a tool like a screen reader. But if you've added alt text to an image and the image can't load because maybe the network is not very stable that day, one of the benefits of adding alt text is that the alt text will show up in place of the image that day. So if you've added alt text, or if somebody has added alt text to that image, and that image can show up, you can still convey that information properly. So that benefits everybody in that case. But also, there's some very specific aspects of accessibility that people don't realize is accessibility. For example, tell me that hasn't happened to you. You're trying to use a system you're not familiar with, and you're about to submit that form. You press the submit button, and you get some nonsensical error message, and you just get so frustrated, like, what? I did everything they told me to do, and I don't know what the code 500 means. You know, meaningful error messages is actually one of the what we call the success criterion in the World Wide Web accessibility guidelines, the WCAG, which is the core guidelines that we follow across the world that most accessibility laws and regulation are based on. There's a set of about 50 guidelines when you're considering the level A and AA. One of those guidelines is about providing meaningful error messages to your users so they can understand in plain English, if English is a language that your users are speaking, what the problem is and where it is. It sounds really basic, but it's so not basic that they actually had to codify it into those rules. Things like having big enough buttons so people can click on it not only with a mouse, but also with a finger, for example. So as you get older, especially for men, we get pretty big fingers. It gets harder and harder, especially on your phone, to click on something that might look fine on a desktop or on a laptop, but when you get on your phone, if it doesn't scale properly, if it's not designed properly, it becomes really hard to click on. And it's even harder if you have disabilities, like, for example, conditions that affect your motor abilities, like Parkinson's, for example, and you start having tremors. Things that are very likely, unfortunately, to happen to ourselves or people that we love over time as we get older. So those are some of the things that accessibility is about, and it's really about all of us, so that's why I always like to spend a minute talking about it. So how do we do accessibility at Elsevier? So I'm part of the digital accessibility team at Elsevier. I'm not the boss of the team. You might know my boss. I've ran into several people who know him because he's been at Elsevier for a very long time. He's been there for 27 years. His name is Ted Geese. You might have heard of him. But we're one team, and currently we have 6 people. And our core responsibilities are putting together ACRs, which stands for Accessibility Conformance Reports. You might know them as VPATs, which is actually the name of the template that it's based on, but the real name is actually ACRs. We have to put some of those for all of our products. We also provide on-demand support to all our product teams, and we also provide training on accessibility and on the tools that can help you track the accessibility or evaluate the accessibility of your products. What I mean is of all the product teams that we support. And we have to do this on a 360-degree scale. And what I mean by that is Elsevier is owned by a parent company called RailX, and they don't have their own accessibility team, so we have to support them when they need help. We have sister companies, such as LexisNexis, that you might have heard of. They have their own accessibility team, but some of our sister companies do not, so we have to support them when they need help. And we also have portfolio product companies, such as Digital Commons, that don't have their own accessibility team, and we work with them to support them. And we do that using 4 systems to help us scale our reach. And that's what I'm going to talk about, because this is all about our commitment to accessibility, both at Elsevier and for Digital Commons. So the first system that we use to scale our reach is our champions program. So we aim to have 1 champion, we aim to have 4 champions ideally on every product team across Elsevier and all of our portfolio product team. That means that ideally we want to have 1 product owner, 1 designer, 1 developer, and 1 QE engineer, a quality engineer, on every product team trained in accessibility. That's the ideal state, and we don't always achieve it, but what's really great to see is most of the time we don't have to seek those people out. They raise their hand and they come to us and say, I am interested in accessibility. I want to learn more. So when they raise their hand, we put them through a series of classes that are relevant to their role. So they're not just going to learn about things that really don't matter to a designer, because the designer and the developers do very different things. So they shouldn't have to learn about the same things. We put them through very role-relevant courses, and then they have to create their own job-relevant project to show us how they've learned about accessibility. And once they've passed that requirement, we certify them, and then they just have to check in with what we call their accessibility champions once a quarter. So they talk to those champions, which are kind of a go-between between us. Those are normally long-term champions that have been doing that for a long time within that same discipline. So it could be a designer champion, a developer champion, somebody who speaks their language, because a designer speaks a very different day-to-day language as than a product owner does. So it's important that we keep that within those tribes or those kind of silos in a way, because those people have needs and face challenges that are unique to those disciplines. And it's really important for us to know on the accessibility teams what some of those folks are facing on the ground, what kind of accessibility challenges. Because if designer Susie is running into a specific accessibility challenge on one product in France, for example, there's a very good chance that other designers throughout Europe have either run into that problem or will run into that problem very soon. And we can start developing either a better understanding of the problem or start developing resources to help them through that problem and find solutions. So those champions, those senior champions come and help us out and relay that information to us. So that's our champion program, trained specialists on accessibility within their own discipline. There we go. The second system that we have in place is design systems. What are design systems, if you're not familiar? It's basically a library of reusable components that are designed and developed in such a way that you can reuse them, but the design and the implementation are already made accessible. You can tweak them. You can think of them as like Lego bricks, but you have a finite set that you can work with. And those Lego bricks, you know that you can pair them up in such a way that no matter how you pair them up, the accessibility requirements are already thought of, so you can't get it wrong. It's not going to cover everything within a product, but it would cover things that are very commonly used in a product. For example, buttons. You're not going to have a product on the web without buttons, and buttons are used in many different ways across products, you really don't need to be redesigning buttons every time you put a new page together. So a design system would give you a list of ways you can combine you can put a button on your site. As a designer, you can use it and configure it in such a way that then developers can implement it quickly because they already have that code ready, and they know that all those permutations are not going to create an accessibility problem. And we have the luxury at Elsevier that we have 2 different design systems that are maintained by 2 different teams, so we don't have to maintain them directly, but we work very closely with those teams, and we meet with them quarterly to set the direction for those design systems, and that helps us scale. And one of those design systems is used by Digital Commons. So this is another way that we support Digital Commons and those of you who use the Digital Commons platform with accessibility. The third system that we use is our tech tools. We use, like all of you, a lot of different communication systems to keep in touch with teams and get feedback from the field. Also ticketing systems like Jira, documentation systems like Confluence to document a lot of the processes that we want people to follow, to share some wisdom and provide feedback on tickets. And we also have a lot of different tools that we share with teams so they can scan their product either at the application level or the page level or extension within their browsers so they can keep scanning documents and application as they go. So we're trying to provide people with tools so they can evaluate the accessibility of their product or documents as early as possible. So we don't wait until the very end of the process, whatever their process is, until a few days before it's about to go live, and somebody goes, "Oh, did you check the accessibility of this?" We're trying to move that, what we call shifting left, as much as possible. So we use a lot of tools like that, and I actually have a couple of slides at the end of this deck where I've there's not a lot of details here by design on these slides, because I didn't want to put too much information that was going to distract you here, but I have 2 slides full of links to a lot of different tools. If you're wondering about what kind of tools we use or anything like that, it's at the end of this deck. So if you want to take a look after the conference, you can look at that, and there's also my contact information if you have any questions about any of those tools. But we use a lot of those tools to help us scale our reach as well. And the fourth system, it went a little too far. Here we go. The fourth system that we use is we share resources. Now, that might sound funny because I just said we basically share a lot of resources. But what I mean by that is that we share resources 2 ways, in that we create the initial ACR, for example, for a product. But when we create an ACR for a product, we say we have to conduct a review of that product. And so we came up with a list of all the problems that we found. We give that to the team, we give them their ACR. And part of the deal is we give them their ACR, but their part of the deal is they have to work on fixing those problems. As they fix those problems, we recommend that they update their ACR so it shows the most current level of accessibility for their product. But as they move forward, that also empowers them to really own the accessibility of their product. So it doesn't feel like something is, accessibility is a process that's owned by somebody else. They own it. They feel like they've got a stake in it. It doesn't feel like some thing that somebody else is worried about. They're worried about it. And it makes teams a lot more concerned about it, and they want to keep up with it. That combined with champions has really been a very successful strategy to really getting teams to buy into accessibility at scale. And we provide systems like user personas. What are user personas? They're fictional representation of users with real disabilities described in such a way that designers can wrap their heads around the limitations that some people might have in using their product, because not everyone is an expert in disabilities, and especially young designers, people that haven't been in the job market, or we're not older and don't understand, how those things work, especially with disabilities. If you know anyone with a disability, especially as you get older, very frequently you'll get combination of disabilities. It's kind of a 2-for-1 deal. A lot of the time, certain disabilities will come as a package, unfortunately, and but they won't always impact you in the same way. A lot of disabilities come on a spectrum, so it's very important for designers to kind of wrap their head around that. And we'll use personas, and we'll have also customers send us ideas for personas in our tool, saying, hey, I have a colleague who suffers from this condition. I think it'd be great if you guys could design something around that, because she's not the only one that I've heard with that condition. And we'll create a persona. If it's something that we see as a real candidate, we'll create a persona around that and share it with the design teams and help them wrap their head around that and create some design patterns around it. So it's bi-directional communication that we find very helpful, but we really depend on not only on the teams on the ground to feed us back that information, but also customers like you to send us back that information saying, hey, this is working, or no, this is not working. We hear from students, we hear from librarians, we hear from researchers in good, sending us good. It's always good feedback, but sometimes it's positive feedback, sometimes negative feedback, but things that we have to hear, because we can't anticipate every possible permutation of disability combination. Okay, so that was about scaling our reach. I want to talk for a minute about what DC has been able to achieve when it comes to accessibility in the past year. You heard yoga, for those of you who were in our session this morning. They've fixed a lot of things when it comes to the submission form and the cookie banner, especially around keyboard navigation and contrast this year. And there's more to come. If you saw that slide this morning, you saw that some of the items were completed, and there's still a lot of items that are still in the works. So that's in the works. And there are things that they're still committed to doing. They're still going to start using our design system, one of our design system, and they're going to use it even more prevalently, especially as they rebuild some of those components that Yoga alluded to this morning, that some of the building block of the DC platform are a big lift to rebuild. They're going to be rebuilt using those design systems for the presentation layer, and that's only going to increase the accessibility of the tool. And when you ask for on-demand visual artifacts to be designed by DC designers, those designers are trained in accessibility, and they factor that in when they create those artifacts for you. Now, I want to talk a little bit about ADA Title II and the recent update that the Department of Justice made this year in April to the Title II. So Title II of the ADA is all about regulation for state and local governments when it comes to the accessibility of their digital resources. So that also means for public institutions of higher learning. But what is that about, and what kind of impact is that going to have? In case you haven't been following closely, here's the distilled version. Basically, starting either in April of 2027 or April of 2026, you're gonna have to make sure that your content is accessible, and I'll touch on what that deadline is and how you figure it out in just a second. But there's also some broad exemption to those things. First of all, you won't have to make anything accessible that you've created before that deadline. That's number one. Number two, anything that's individualized, that has a password and is individualized to one person, has to be made accessible, which I find very curious, but that's one of the exemption. There's also any pre-existing social media posts that are also exempt. Anything that was posted on your platforms by third parties are also exempt. And that's a double-edged sword. I'll talk about that in a second. And any archive content is also exempt. Now, if you pull something out of the archive, you'll have to make it accessible. But if it's archived, you're good to go. So the deadline, which deadline applies to you? It depends on the size of your population. For institution of higher learning, it's kind of tricky to calculate the size of a population. I've talked to lawyers who would explain to me, I live in New York. In New York State, for example, they have a big higher education network, the SUNY network in upstate New York. The different satellite schools were under the impression that their population was the size of their campus, basically. That is not correct. The size of their population is the size of the state, the population of the state of New York, because it's not at the satellite campus scale that they're looking at. They're looking at it from the legal standpoint. It's at the size of the entire system. And the system serves the state of New York. Therefore, the size of the population is the state of New York, which is obviously greater than that 50K limit. And that means that for the folks in New York or the folks that work in the UC system here in California, the deadline would be April 2026. So if you're not sure, I would encourage you to look into the size of your population and figure that out. And for now, it's only for public entities, but depending on who wins the election a month from now, we might see some updates to Title II and Title III, actually, that will apply to the private side of that equation. But it really depends on who wins the election. All right, we're coming up on the end here. So how can you prepare? You want to make sure that you've classified your documents in a way that matches with the way that the ADA is telling you to classify your document, so you can calculate your expected processing capacity, because one way or another, once you reach that deadline, you're gonna have to process those documents. You want to seek out some help to help you process those documents, either tools to help you do it or vendors to do that. You want to talk to you want to communicate with your vendors to make sure that they know what you expect of them, and because some vendors will, and what they create will impact the accessibility of your digital content. So you want to look at your RFPs and your contracts, and you want to train on accessibility. And I have some resources in those slide about that, and some of those training resources are free. One quick tip is that when you upload a document to a platform like Digital Commons, it doesn't become accessible by default. Even though you're not expected to make anything accessible before that deadline, when I was talking about the ADA, about April 26, 27, it's best practice to make as many documents as you can accessible, which means that in some cases, you might have to go to those platforms, download those documents, make them accessible, and re-upload them. And that's true even if even if you don't want to make those documents accessible, but people are accessing them. and they're asking you to make them accessible, you can't ask the folks that run that platform to make them accessible. It's still your responsibility. Remember I said you're not responsible under the ADA Title II for the accessibility of the documents that third party have posted on your platform. Well, it's the same thing. If you posted something on somebody else's platform, it's still your problem. Unfortunately, that's how it works. So you're still responsible for your content. And final slide, accessibility is a journey. We're all learning along the way. It's an opportunity for growth. And if you share your feedback, we can all learn and make platforms better so we can help each other along the way and make platforms like DC better, because when you let Digital Commons know, it trickles up to us on the accessibility team at Elsevier, and we can help them make their platform better around accessibility as well. So now I'm happy to take some questions. Now remember, I work for Elsevier, so I'm not an expert on the accessibility of the Digital Commons platform, but I am an expert on accessibility. So if you have some general accessibility question, I'm happy to answer those now, or today or tomorrow I'm going to be around. If you have specific accessibility question about the Digital Commons platform, I would talk to someone like Yoga. She would be able to answer your question. That being said, if you have any general accessibility question, I'd be happy to take them now. Yes. I think she's coming with the microphone for you.
Thank you very much. You did indicate that the application of Title II ADA is for public universities for now, or public organizations, but I think private institutions that receive government funds are also in a position where they have to meet it. It's the same way for like Title IX and everything else. So that's just something to keep in mind.
That's a great precision,
keep
yeah.
You up at night. Sorry.
Yes, that's a great precision. That's right. If any kind of institution or organization gets public funding from the federal government here in the United States, that deadline, those changes that were made to the Title II of the ADA, that would apply to you as well. And it's important to understand that, because you'll be affected. But that's not new. That's something that was existing before. But that's a great point. And I was trying to keep it high level in those presentations, because it's hard to touch on all those points in just half an hour. But thank you for precising that, because I'm sure some people didn't know, and that might really help them out. Yes, sir.
This will impact any documents that have been uploaded to, let's say, any LMS, like Canvas or other? Or it's only documents that are available to public?
Well, it depends where. It depends on if the Alumni Association is a private, if it's a private organization within, let's say it's an alumni association at a public institution, it all has to do with the funding of the organization itself, right? It all goes back to what we just talked about with the funding of that. But really, it all goes back to, do you have users that need to see that content in an accessible manner? That's really what it comes down to. From a legal standpoint, it depends where your funding is coming from. So if the organization, the alumni organization, is a completely separate entity from the institution itself, and it's completely self-sustaining and has only private funds, then legally, it's not, it doesn't have to comply with that recent update to Title II of the ADA. But if it's in any way funded by public funds that you get from the federal government, then yes, it would have to, all those documents starting in April of 26 or 27 would have to be made accessible as they are made available to members of the Alumni Association starting on that date.
Thank you. That was very good. I mean, this is where I didn't want it to go, but thank you for answering that. But I'm more asking about students and faculty that will have to use their own personal password and then access the system like Canvas, and then access those documents. All the documents, PDF, whatever faculty uploads, do they need to be compliant?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not just the documents are available to the public. It has to do with the funding of the institution. You know, whether it's a local government, state institution, a local library, anything like that. And it was a gray area for decades, but they finally made an update that we've been waiting for in my world for a long time. And you know, it's good to finally have clarity on that topic. Any other questions? If not, if you would rather talk to me directly, I'm going to be roaming the halls, and I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one. Thank you.